They say Ravens Point was never meant to have a watchtower. The place wasn't marked on any official map. It was a jagged finger of cliff that jutted out over the sea, flanked by forests so dense they seemed to swallow sound. An old lighthouse once stood there, long since abandoned, its skeletal remains lashed by endless coastal storms. But in the late 1970s, during a period of strange shipwrecks and missing hikers, the local government hastily built a watchtower there, a temporary wooden structure meant to monitor the area. It was only ever staffed by a single night guard. His name was Joseph Stroud. Joseph was 34, a veteran park ranger with a fondness for solitude. The job suited him. Nights alone, a clear view of the sea, and a small cabin nearby where he could sleep during the day. For the first few months, Joseph reported nothing unusual. The tower's radio remained mostly silent, and the sea was calm. But in early October, things began to change. It started with static on the radio, a low, hissing interference that would swell without warning, sometimes resolving in a faint, rhythmic tapping, like Morse code, but too erratic to translate. Joseph reported it, but technicians found no fault with the equipment. Next came the lights. Around 2 a.m. one foggy morning, Joseph logged seeing a pale blue light moving through the forest below. He thought it was a lost hiker with a lantern and radioed in to dispatch a search team. When they arrived hours later, there were no footprints, no sign of anyone. Only the faint smell of salt water where none should have been. Joseph grew more unsettled with each passing night. He began sleeping less, eating little, keeping detailed notes in the logbook. October 9th, light again. Moved closer to base of tower. No sign at dawn. October 12th, heard footsteps on stairs. No one visible. Door locked from inside. October 15th, voice on radio. My name spoken in woman's voice. Repeated 3 times. His supervisor suggested he take leave, but Joseph refused. Something's wrong out here, he insisted. I need to know what. On October 21st, Joseph's notes stopped abruptly. That night, at 1:37 a.m., the radio picked up a transmission from the tower. There's someone on the stairs. They're knocking, but I can't see anyone. I'm locking the hatch. If anyone hears this... The transmission ended mid-sentence. A response team was dispatched immediately, reaching Ravens Point just after dawn. They found the tower door wide open, swinging in the wind. Inside, the hatch to the observation deck was sealed from the inside with a heavy iron bar. They had to cut through it to enter. The deck was empty. Joseph Stroud was gone. His flashlight, radio, and even his boots were still there. The logbook lay open to a final, unfinished sentence. It's opening the hatch. I can see its hands, but no trace of him was ever found. No signs of struggle. No blood. No disturbance in the dust. It was as if he had simply ceased to exist. For weeks after, strange reports came in from hikers along the cliffs. Faint blue lights weaving through the trees, the sound of a man's voice calling for help, footsteps crunching in empty woods. The tower was abandoned soon after. Today it stands rotting in the mist, its upper hatch permanently sealed. Locals claim that on foggy nights, a pale figure can sometimes be seen pacing the deck, staring out to sea. Others say if you tune an old radio to the right frequency, you might hear a faint, desperate voice repeating one last, unfinished warning. It's opening the hatch. I can see its hands, but... And then, only static. They're watching from everywhere. Subscribe before it's too late. And tell me, where are you watching from? They say that a lone watchtower stands at the edge of Grayson State Forest. Built in the 1940s and long abandoned by the Forestry Service, it remains an eerie silhouette against the tree line, its iron stairs spiraling upward like a spine twisted in the wind. Locals avoid it, though no one can quite agree why. Some say it's unstable, others speak of old accidents or wild animals lurking nearby. But there's another story, one whispered late at night in town bars and over campfires, a story about footsteps on those iron stairs. Footsteps that don't belong to anyone living. It was early October when Evan took the assignment. He was a seasonal fire spotter and eager for extra pay. The state had received reports of late summer lightning strikes, and they needed someone to monitor the northern quadrant from the old Grayson Tower. The tower hadn't been officially used in decades, but a recent inspection found it structurally sound. They'd even repaired the radio equipment. Still, Evan noticed the unease in the ranger's eyes as he handed him the keys. "Stay sharp out there," the ranger said, "and if you hear anything strange, don't go looking for it." Evan laughed it off. A week alone in a tower? Peace and quiet. He was looking forward to it. The first 2 days passed uneventfully. The view was incredible. Endless waves of autumn trees glowing gold and crimson. Nights were chilly but calm. The only sounds were the wind and the occasional call of an owl. But on the third night, just past midnight, Evan awoke to a sharp metallic clang. At first he thought it was a branch hitting the tower. But then it came again, clang, 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 and he realized the sound was rhythmic. Heavy, deliberate. Footsteps. Someone, or something, was climbing the iron stairs. Evan sat frozen, heart pounding. The stairs were old, rusted. Each step vibrated faintly through the floor. He waited, listening, straining to hear any other noise, voices, animals, anything to explain it. But there was only the slow, measured steps drawing closer. He forced himself to the window and peered out. The moon was bright, casting stark shadows, but the staircase below was empty. No flashlight beam, no figure, no sign of movement. Yet the steps continued. Clang, clang, clang. They reached the landing just below the cabin. The final step sounded louder than the rest, like a weight settling into place. Evan grabbed the radio and called the ranger station. Static. Only static. Silence followed. Minutes dragged by. No further sounds. Nothing at the door. Finally, he crept over and bolted it firmly shut. Then he waited until dawn, eyes wide in the darkness. Radio crackling uselessly. When morning came, Evan searched the staircase. Rusted leaves and pine needles littered each step, undisturbed. No footprints. No drag marks. Nothing. He radioed in to report the incident. The ranger on duty was quiet for a long moment before replying. "You heard them too," he said softly. Evan pressed for an explanation. The ranger sighed. Back in '58, a spotter named Keller manned that tower. One night, same as you, he reported hearing footsteps. He thought it was a prank, someone trying to scare him. He went out to confront them. He never came back down. They found Keller's body at the base of the tower days later. No obvious injuries. No cause of death. But the iron staircase bore strange gouges, as if something had dragged across it, deep enough to score the metal. After that, the tower was decommissioned. But now and then, when someone's sent up there, the same thing happens. Evan spent the rest of his assignment uneasy, but no other strange occurrences happened until the final night. It was a crisp, clear evening. He locked the cabin door early, double-checked the radio, and tried to keep his mind occupied. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. Nothing. Relief washed over him, and he allowed himself to drift asleep. At 3:17 a.m., a loud metallic clang jolted him awake. Clang, clang, clang. Not slow this time. Fast. Urgent. Like someone running up the stairs. Evan grabbed the radio. Dead air. Clang, 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 clang. The footsteps reached the landing. A heavy thud struck the door. Then another. Someone was trying to get in. And then a voice. Thin, reedy, barely audible through the door. "Let me in. Please. They're coming." It sounded human. Desperate. Evan almost moved to open the door, but something held him back. Instinct. The voice was wrong. Flat. Hollow. "Please. They're right behind me." He looked out the window. Nothing on the stairs. And yet the voice persisted, repeating, louder now, more frantic, "Let me in." The door shuddered, as if something struck it again and again. Evan backed away, heart racing. Suddenly, the voice stopped. The pounding ceased. Silence. He waited for hours until sunrise. When he finally dared to open the door, the landing was empty. No marks. No sign of anyone, human or otherwise. He descended the tower at dawn and radioed in, demanding to be pulled from the assignment. The ranger on duty didn't argue. Later, when he returned to the station, An older ranger took him aside. "You were smart not to open the door," the man said gravely. "Others weren't so lucky." No one spoke of it further. The tower remains, still used occasionally when needed, but always reluctantly, and only by those who've never heard the stories. And late at night, if the wind is just right, hikers claim you can hear it from the forest below. Clang, clang, clang. Footsteps on the iron stairs, waiting. They say in the Appalachian backwoods, deep where the roads rot away and the air grows thick with pine and moss, there are structures that no map acknowledges, places that don't quite sit right in the world. One such place is a watchtower near Marlow Ridge, or so the story goes. The first mention of it came from an old ranger, long since retired. His name was Glenn Maddox. He'd been with the Forest Service for nearly 30 years, patrolling the same rugged stretch of wilderness that swallowed countless hikers and occasional poachers. Glenn was a rational man, the kind who brushed off campfire tales and didn't spook easy. Until one autumn evening when something changed. It began with a call from dispatch. Routine. A missing persons report. A backpacker named Jason Lowell had failed to check in. Last known coordinates placed him near the Northern Loop Trail, dangerously close to the less-traveled side of Marlow Ridge. Glenn was tasked with a simple sweep. He geared up before dawn, leaving behind his usual trail and heading off-path where the map thinned to nothing but contour lines and shaded relief. After hours of trudging through dense undergrowth, something odd appeared ahead. A clearing. That alone was strange. The ridge was notorious for its unbroken tree canopy. But there it was, a patch of flattened earth, ringed with dead grass and scattered stones. And at its center, a tower. It looked old, impossibly so. Rough-hewn timber formed its frame, dark with age and something else, a sheen that Glenn later struggled to describe. The structure rose maybe 40 feet high, with a narrow staircase winding around its exterior. No identifying markers, no service logos, no sign it was maintained or ever officially built. But the strangest thing wasn't the tower itself. It was the overwhelming sensation that it shouldn't be there. Glenn would later say that standing before it felt like staring at a photograph from a dream you couldn't remember. Something was fundamentally off. Still, duty won out over instinct. If Jason had wandered here, Glenn had to check it out. Step by cautious step, he climbed the staircase, each footfall echoing unnaturally loud in the still air. The wood beneath his boots felt dry but oddly warm, as if it retained a memory of sunlight that wasn't present. At the top, a cramped platform opened to a single metal chair and a rusted radio. The chair faced the forest, bolted to the floor, with deep scratch marks gouged into its arms, the kind made by desperate, clenched fingers. The radio was silent save for faint static. That's when Glenn noticed something worse. The forest looked wrong. From that height, he should have seen the familiar patchwork of treetops and distant peaks. Instead, the forest below appeared distorted. The trees seemed too dense, their shadows pooling unnaturally. Worst of all, there were no sounds. No wind, no birds, only static. Then the radio crackled. At first, just bursts of hiss. Then a faint voice, barely audible. "Come down." The voice repeated once. Then silence. Glenn, heart-pounding, scanned the clearing below. Empty. No sign of Jason. No movement. Yet the air grew heavier, as if something unseen pressed against him from all sides. He gripped the railing. His knuckles blanched white. And that's when he saw it. A second staircase. Not the one he had climbed. This one spiraled upward, above the platform, into the air where no additional structure should exist. Yet there it was, faint but visible in the corner of his vision, like an afterimage burned into his retina. When he tried to look directly at it, it faded. But glancing away, it remained, coaxing, beckoning. The radio flared again. "Keep going." The voice was different this time, deeper, layered like several tones overlapping. Not Jason's voice, not anyone he recognized. Instinct screamed at him to flee. But curiosity, that fatal human flaw, rooted him in place. He reached toward the unseen stairs, hand trembling. In the instant his fingers brushed the air where they began, the world shifted. Later, Glenn would describe it as stepping through a membrane. The forest below vanished. The tower beneath him ceased to exist. He stood in a void of oppressive gray mist. And in that mist, shapes moved. Some seemed vaguely human, silhouettes drifting just beyond clarity. Others were wrong, angular things that flickered in and out of perception. No sound reached him here, yet he felt their presence keenly, like pressure against his skull. Then, out of the fog, Jason appeared, or what remained of him. He stood unmoving, eyes wide and unfocused, as if frozen mid-thought. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, and around his feet, the fog darkened, coalescing into claw-like forms that gripped his ankles. Glenn stumbled backward, the oppressive mist tightening around his chest. His breath came in ragged gasps. He turned, searching for any way out, and in that moment of panic, he heard the voice again. Go back. Forget. He ran. Whether he truly retraced his steps, or something let him go, he couldn't say. But suddenly he was back atop the real platform, forest below, the unseen staircase gone. The radio was silent. Without looking back, Glenn descended. The clearing, once deathly still, now buzzed faintly with insects, a jarring return to normalcy that felt anything but comforting. When he reached the tree line, he looked once more. The tower was gone. Not collapsed, not hidden, simply no longer there. Glenn never found Jason. Official reports listed him as another lost hiker, presumed dead. Glenn, however, left the service weeks later, retiring in silence. Years later, after the story leaked among local rangers, others reported brief sightings of the Watchtower, always near Marlow Ridge, always vanishing soon after. Some called it a hallucination, others a shared delusion. But a handful of rangers, those who'd glimpsed it firsthand, began referring to it by a different name. The Watchtower that shouldn't exist. And if the whispers are true, it still appears from time to time, waiting for the curious, the lost, and the unlucky. Those who climb it may not always come back, and those who do rarely speak of what they saw. This story isn't over yet. Hit subscribe to follow the shadows. There's something unnerving about a watchtower at night, perched high above an endless expanse of black, isolated from the world below. You tell yourself you're alone up there, because you have to believe that. But sometimes something believes otherwise. This story comes from a man named Daniel, a Forestry Service employee in the Pacific Northwest. His assignment: a month-long solo shift manning an old fire watchtower deep within a national forest. The tower was ancient, built in the 1950s, long since upgraded with modern equipment, but its bones remained the same: aged steel beams and creaking wooden floorboards. It stood above a vast sea of towering pines that stretched for miles in every direction. No other structures in sight. No roads. No trails. Exactly what the job required: vigilance, solitude, and an unbroken watch over the forest. Daniel was used to working alone. He welcomed it. But this tower had a strange reputation among the veteran rangers. The kind of reputation no one spoke about directly, just offhand comments, nervous glances, stories that never quite reached the punchline. You'll be fine up there, one ranger had said. Just don't stare too long into the glass at night. Daniel had laughed it off at the time. But by the end of this story, he'd never laugh about it again. His first week passed uneventfully. The days were long but beautiful. Sunlight rippling over endless green, clouds drifting lazily across the horizon. He spent his hours scanning for smoke plumes, logging weather conditions, and radioing in his reports. At night, the tower transformed. A fragile island of light in an ocean of darkness. The windows became black mirrors, reflections staring back at him in every direction. He kept the lanterns dim, trying to minimize the effect, but the glass seemed to drink in the darkness regardless. By the second week, he began to feel watched. It was subtle at first, a sense of unease he couldn't shake, an occasional shiver crawling up his spine for no apparent reason. A sound, soft, almost imperceptible, like fingers brushing against the glass. Rational mind engaged. It had to be the wind, or shifting temperature causing the metal frame to creak. But that didn't explain the feeling. That cold, creeping certainty that something unseen was just beyond the glass, watching. It escalated on the 10th night. Daniel had finished his evening log entry and was preparing to turn in when he heard it. Clear, deliberate. 3 soft taps against the window behind him. Top! 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 He froze. His reflection stared back at him in the darkened glass. Nothing outside. No movement. No shape. Just endless black forest. He turned on the floodlight. Its beam cut through the night, illuminating the deck and the clearing below. No animals. No branches moving near the structure. Nothing. Trying to dismiss it, he shut off the floodlight and climbed into his bunk. Sleep, however, refused to come. At exactly 3:13 a.m., he heard it again. Top, top, top. This time from a window closest to his bed. He sat upright, heart pounding. The tap was followed by a soft, dragging sound, like nails trailing slowly across the glass. He grabbed his flashlight and scanned the interior. Empty. He shone the beam through the window, only darkness beyond. But as the light passed across the glass, he caught something just for an instant. A faint, foggy outline on the window. For finger marks, as if something had pressed a hand against the glass. He scrambled up, breath quickening, and ran outside onto the deck. He circled the tower with his flashlight. Nothing. No footprints on the wooden planks. The forest below was still and silent. He told himself it must have been condensation, some odd trick of temperature. But deep down, he didn't believe it. From that night forward, the phenomenon intensified. Every night at precisely 3:13 a.m., the taps. Sometimes soft, sometimes loud enough to rattle the panes. And always from a different window, as if whatever it was moved around the tower as he slept. Daniel began dreading the hour. He kept every light on, hoping it would deter the unseen visitor. It didn't. On the 15th night, he tried recording the sound. He set up an audio recorder by the window where the taps usually began. What it captured was worse than he imagined. The next morning, reviewing the tape, he heard the taps, clear and sharp. But beneath them, another sound. A whisper, barely audible but there. A voice, breathy and broken, repeating a single word. Inside, Daniel stared at the waveform on his laptop in disbelief. He replayed it again and again. Inside, he contacted the ranger station. Officially, they chalked it up to stress and isolation, common in such postings. Unofficially, the senior ranger simply said, "You're not the first to hear it." When Daniel pressed him, the man refused to elaborate. "Stick to your routines," the ranger advised. "Ignore the taps. Whatever you do, don't open the door at night." By the 3rd week, Daniel was unraveling. He stopped sleeping. The taps grew louder, more aggressive. One night, he awoke to the sound of glass flexing, as if something pressed its full weight against it. Peering through blurry, sleep-deprived eyes, he saw it. An impression on the largest window. A full handprint, but grotesquely elongated, fingers twice the length of a human's, pressed firmly against the glass. It held there for nearly a minute before fading away, leaving only the chilling memory behind. Daniel reached his breaking point on the 21st night. The taps came early, not at 3:13, but just after sunset. They moved rapidly from window to window, circling the tower in a frenzy. And then the door handle rattled. Violently. Something was trying to force its way in. Daniel grabbed his rifle. Not that he expected it would help, and stood frozen, aimed at the door. The rattling stopped. Silence. Then a soft whisper just beyond the door. Inside. This time, it was not on a recording. He heard it with his own ears. Something shifted in him then. A primal instinct surged forward, flight over fight. Daniel radioed the station. "I'm abandoning post. Emergency evac required." Against protocol, he fled the tower. He sprinted through the dark forest, not daring to look back. The next day, a recovery team found him at the ranger station, exhausted, shaking, but alive. When they retrieved his belongings from the tower, they found something strange. Every window bore a single long handprint from the outside. No footprints. No signs of forced entry. Nothing. Just the prints, cold and inexplicable. Daniel never returned to the tower. It remains active, but few volunteer for extended assignments there. And though no one speaks of it openly, every new ranger hears the same quiet warning. Don't stare too long into the glass at night. They say the most dangerous thing about working alone in a watchtower isn't the isolation or the weather or even the wildlife. It's what your mind can do when the hours stretch too long, when shadows settle into the corners of the room, when every sound begins to feel a little too deliberate. That's what I thought, anyway, until I realized sometimes it isn't your mind at all. Sometimes something else is listening, too. I took a job as a fire lookout 2 summers ago. A seasonal gig. Mostly older folks took it, but I'd always loved the forest and needed a break from the city. The tower was one of the older ones, built in the 1940s, perched high above a dense sea of pine. It was isolated, yes, but beautiful. The tower had a small bed, a wood stove, a rickety metal stair, and an old 2-way radio that served as my only contact with a ranger station miles away. For the first few weeks, things were quiet, peaceful even. I'd wake early, scan for smoke, read books, and fall asleep to the hum of insects outside. The radio would crackle now and then, mostly routine check-ins or weather warnings. But on the 22nd night, something changed. It started with static. I was writing in my journal around 1 a.m. Couldn't sleep when the radio hissed to life. A burst of harsh static, then silence. I leaned over, fiddled with the dial, thinking maybe a storm was coming through. But the sky was clear, stars sharp as needles. Another burst, this time longer, sharper. I grabbed the handset. Base, this is Tower 9. Do you copy? No reply, just a soft hiss. I was about to shut it off when I heard it. A voice. Soft, barely audible beneath the static, but unmistakably a voice. Daniel, my name. I froze. At first, I thought I'd misheard. I adjusted the volume, leaned in close. Daniel, clearer this time, as if whispered just beside the speaker. My stomach flipped. I scanned the darkness outside. The tower was nearly 80 feet up. No one could be outside, and no one knew I went by Daniel. The ranger station had my full name on file, Danielson. I tried again. Base, this is Tower 9. Please respond. Nothing. Another whisper. Daniel, come down. I shut off the radio. For a long moment, the only sound was my own heartbeat, thudding hard. Trying to be rational, I told myself it was interference. Stray signals can sometimes bleed through. Maybe a prank from another tower? But no other tower was closer than 20 miles. Still, I convinced myself it was a glitch. Until the next night. At exactly 1 a.m., the static returned. And again, Daniel. This time, it wasn't alone. I heard faint breathing. Vet, cello. And beneath it, a low, rhythmic tapping. Like nails on metal. I refused to answer. Sat frozen, listening. Then a new message. We see you. Something primal twisted in my gut. Without thinking, I reached for my flashlight and swept it across the room. Nothing. The beam caught only old wood, steel, and glass. But outside, just at the edge of the clearing beneath the tower, movement. At first, I thought it was an animal, a deer maybe. But then it stood upright. A tall figure, unmoving, staring up at the tower. No flashlight reflected off its eyes. No details I could make out. Just a dark silhouette. Wrong somehow, as if its limbs bent at the wrong angles. The radio clicked again. Come down, Daniel. I backed away from the window. Locked the door. Not that would help. The tower was thin wood and glass. For hours, I sat in the dark, clutching a flare gun. At dawn, the figure was gone. I tried to call base that morning. Tower 9 to base. Possible trespasser last night. Do you read? Finally, a crackled reply. Copy, Tower 9. Negative on any patrols or visitors in your area. Suggests staying alert. They brushed it off. The next few nights were silent. No voice. No figure. I started to think maybe it really had been my mind, after all. Stress, lack of sleep. Until night 26. Eine Uhr nachts. The radio burst to life. Full volume, without me touching it. Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. Over and over, the voice whispered. Then it changed, deeper, layered, as if two voices overlapped. "Come see us." My flashlight flickered, then died. The overhead light dimmed, and from below the tower, I heard the creak of the metal stairs. One step at a time, slow, deliberate, metal groaning beneath an impossible weight. I gripped the flare gun, heart hammering. The steps continued, halfway up, 3/4, then stopped. Silence. I waited, breath shallow. The radio hissed again. "Behind you." I spun, nearly firing the flare. No one, but on the dusty glass of the window, facing me, smeared across the inside, where no one but me could reach. A single handprint, long fingers, splayed wide, too wide for any human hand, still wet. At dawn, I packed my things, left the tower, drove straight to the ranger station. They found no footprints, no sign of forced entry. But when they checked the radio logs, and here's the part that still haunts me, they found nothing. No transmissions from the base. Nostra signals. But on the tape, faintly beneath the static, they heard it too. Daniel, come down." I never went back. Some say the old towers pick up more than just radio waves. That they're antennae for something older, something that waits between the trees. And sometimes it calls out, by name. They say that in the deepest stretches of the northern Rockies, long after the trails have ended and the map gives way to a blank expanse of green, there stands a solitary watchtower. Not one maintained by any ranger service, not one listed in any official registry. Yet locals, those few who dare to live in such remote corners, speak of seeing its faint glow through the trees on certain nights. A soft, amber light, pulsing like a heartbeat, high above the canopy. They call it the light that never went out. And those who sought its source rarely return the same. 3 years ago, a man named Daniel Weiss, a freelance photographer and backcountry survivalist, stumbled upon the legend during a brief stay in a mountain town called Ellenspine. It was one of those fading settlements, no more than a few hundred people clinging to existence amidst towering pines and endless fog. The kind of place that welcomes strangers with wary eyes. Daniel had been chasing old fire lookout towers across the country for a photo series. Weathered wood, rusted metal. He loved capturing their stoic loneliness. When an old trapper at the town's only bar mentioned the tower that wasn't on any map, Daniel's curiosity flared. The man's words were cryptic. "You'll see the light if it wants to be seen. If it don't, count yourself lucky." Of course, Daniel dismissed the warning. Local folklore, he thought. The perfect story to embellish his project. The next morning, armed with his camera, drone, and a week's worth of supplies, he set out alone. The first 2 days were uneventful. Daniel followed abandoned ranger trails deep into the wilderness. The dense forest swallowed the sun by mid-afternoon, leaving a strange twilight lingering beneath the branches. At night, the woods seemed to pulse with unseen life. Distant cracks of wood, soft rhythmic thuds. Normal, he told himself. Normal forest sounds. But on the third night, as he camped near an old stream bed, he saw it. A faint glow, far through the trees. Not the harsh beam of a searchlight. Not the flicker of a distant campfire. It was steady, warm, and high. Daniel grabbed his camera and took a long exposure shot. The resulting image chilled him. The light hovered at least 60 feet above the ground, just where a lookout tower's cab should be. But according to his GPS, there shouldn't be anything there. And yet, there it was, beckoning. Compelled by a mixture of wonder and dread, Daniel hiked toward the glow the next morning. The forest thickened unnaturally. The underbrush clawed at his clothes. Game trails vanished without a trace. It was as if the forest wanted him to turn back. But every few hours, when he doubted his path, he'd catch another glimpse of that unwavering amber light through the leaves. It was closer now. By the 5th day, supplies dwindling, he reached a clearing. There it stood, a decrepit steel-framed tower, 20 rickety flights high. Paintless, consumed by rust and moss, its silhouette seemed impossibly fragile against the sky. Yet at its peak, the light shone steadily from the cab. Daniel's heart pounded. His instincts screamed to leave, but the photographer's urge, the need to capture, won out. He began to climb. The metal groaned beneath his boots. Wind hissed through skeletal beams. With each flight, an unnatural chill seeped deeper into his bones. Halfway up, he began to notice things. Old, tattered ranger uniforms snagged on bolts. A child's shoe wedged between steps. Scorched pages of a logbook fluttering in the breeze. Tom didn't feel right here. When he reached the final landing, Daniel hesitated. The light pulsed just beyond the door, warmer now, almost alive. He raised his camera. One shot, then another. But when he checked the screen, each image was black. Confused, he opened the door. The cab was empty. No lantern, no bulb, no visible source of the glow. Yet the space was bathed in amber light. Dust hung motionless in the air. The floor was littered with personal items. A silver lighter, a ranger's badge, a cracked watch still ticking. And in the far corner, a desk held a single open logbook. The last entry was fresh. The light feeds. The light remembers. The light calls them back. Daniel's breath caught. The page beneath his fingers felt warm. Then the temperature dropped. The light deepened, thickening into a suffocating haze. A low hum filled the air. He staggered back, but the door had vanished. In its place, a seamless wall of timber. Footsteps echoed on the stairs below. Slow, measured, more than one set. Then came the voices. Welcome back. You were always meant to return. Stay and be seen. Daniel screamed, pounding on the walls, but the light pressed in, overwhelming thought. His final coherent act was raising the camera, clicking blindly until the battery died. Then silence. A search party found Daniel's abandoned camp weeks later. His GPS tracker pinged for another 3 months, circling a static point deep within the forest where no towers stood. When the signal finally stopped, so did the search. But last winter, a pair of hikers swore they saw a soft amber light high above the treetops during a stormy night. One took a photo. The image, though blurred by rain, clearly showed an old steel-framed tower and a dark figure standing motionless within the cab. Some say it was Daniel. Others say the tower always finds a new keeper. And the light? The light never goes out. Thanks for watching. Comment where you're from. I want to see how far the darkness has spread. Don't forget to subscribe for more horror. They say that Black Hollow forest breathes. Not with life, but with something colder, older, and quieter than the trees themselves. I never gave such stories much weight. As a newly hired forest watcher stationed deep in its heart, I believe my duties would be simple. Patrol the grounds, monitor wildlife, maintain the old watchtower, and log everything. Always log everything. The tower itself stood on a lonely ridge known as Dead Man's Crest, a name inherited from some long-forgotten tragedy. My superiors laughed off the local superstitions, but even their briefings included one strange warning. If you hear voices near the tower, do not respond. If you see lights in the trees, do not investigate. I assumed it was just protocol meant to keep us from wandering into danger. My log began normally. Day 1. Entry 1. Arrived at Black Hollow. The tower is older than expected, wood swollen with age. Iron stair groans under each step. Radio equipment spotty at best. Strange static even when idle. No animal sightings yet. Weather clear. Day 3. Entry 5. Heavy fog rolled in overnight. Visibility down to a few meters. Woke to faint knocking sounds on the tower's lower level. Assumed wood contraction from moisture. Logged and ignored. Day 5. Entry 8. Radio keeps picking up a signal at 3:13 a.m. Faint. Repetitive. Sounds like tapping. 3 slow knocks, then silence. No response when attempting to contact Ranger HQ. Signal vanishes by dawn. Logged as interference. Day 7. Entry 11. Spotted lights in the tree line. Pale blue. Hovering. Possibly atmospheric phenomenon. Stayed within tower perimeter as instructed. At 2 a.m. Heard a voice beneath the tower. Please, help me. Did not respond. Logged incident. At this point, I started sleeping in shifts, never more than 2 hours at a time. Sleep deprivation messes with the mind. I reminded myself of that. And yet, the events escalated. Day 9. Entry 14. Found muddy footprints on tower stairs. Human. Barefoot. No sign of entry breach. Perimeter check revealed no tracks beyond stairwell. No visitors registered at Black Hollow for weeks. Logged and secured tower. Day 10. Entry 15. Awoke to tower door wide open at dawn. No wind recorded. No sign of forced entry. Heavy claw marks observed on inside of doorframe. 3 parallel grooves, too large for local wildlife. Secured door. Contacted HQ. No response. Radio static worse than ever. Signal appears jammed during late hours. Day 12. Entry 18. Light rain. Found scrap of cloth on stair railing. Old. Torn. Deep red stain resembling blood. No matching clothing in supply inventory. Cloth damp despite no recent rain inside tower. I begun to feel watched. Even inside. Day 13. Entry 19. 3:13 a.m. Signal stronger tonight. Sound resembles faint breathing beneath static. Voice repeated, I'm in the trees. Refused to respond. Kept radio off for remainder of night. Recorded event on cassette. Day 14. Entry 21. Something pounded on the tower door from 2:57 to 3:10 a.m. Slow, deliberate strikes. No response given. At dawn, found door warped, as if pressure had bent the old iron hinges. HQ remained silent. No signals reach out. Sleep was no longer possible. I began noticing gaps in my memory. Hours missing from my logs. The air inside the tower grew staler by the day. A sour, metallic tang lingered in the stairwell, and the shadows began to shift. Day 15. Entry 23. Tonight the voice changed. You see us now. Let us in. Not one voice, many. Layered. Male and female. Young and old. I bolted the door, secured every window, yet the air vibrated with their presence. Light bulbs flickered. One burst. Found claw marks extended up the tower's inner walls. No possible human explanation. Day 16. Entry 24. Final log. If anyone finds this, leave. Burn the tower if you must. They have worn me down. I see them now. In every reflection, every shadow corner. Figures without faces. Arms too long, fingers tapered to points. They know my name. They speak it now, always at 3:13. I can no longer resist the compulsion to answer. I've sealed this log inside a steel lockbox beneath the floorboards. My only hope is that someone will read it and understand. This place is a trap. The forest breathes, but not with life. Something deeper dwells here, feeding on those foolish enough to watch from above. I no longer trust my eyes. I no longer trust the ticking clock. If the sun rises, I will not be here to see it. End log. The final page of the log ended there. When a rescue team arrived weeks later, they found the watchtower empty. The steel lockbox was discovered exactly where described, but no trace of the watcher or his voice recordings were ever found. Only 3 faint knocks echoed through the empty stairwell as the team descended. And from the trees beyond the ridge, pale blue lights flickered once more. Waiting. They say that old Firewatch Tower 83, known as Gray Needle among the locals, was abandoned for good reason. It wasn't age that claimed it. It wasn't storm damage or funding cuts or bureaucratic oversight. It was something else entirely. A shape, or rather, the lack of one. And it began on the coldest night of October 1997. Eli Harper had only been with the Forest Service 6 months. Young, eager, and fresh out of training, he'd volunteered for the lonely 2-week rotation up in the Gray Needle. The tower stood deep in the Cascade Range, 5 hours from the nearest ranger station. Older watchmen refused to work there. They spoke of bad signals on the radio, of seeing strange lights drifting through the canopy, of thick fogs that rose even on clear nights. Eli dismissed it as folklore. Isolation does strange things to people, after all. He arrived at Gray Needle one crisp afternoon and found everything in place, maps, supplies, and the weathered logbooks dating back to the 1950s. But one thing unnerved him. Pinned above the desk was a small, torn scrap of paper. It said only, "Do not answer it. If it knocks, no signature, no explanation." Eli smiled nervously and tossed it in a drawer. He'd proved to himself there was nothing to fear. The first 4 days passed uneventfully. Eli spent them noting cloud patterns, checking wind gauges, and scanning for fire risks. The tower stood atop a narrow ridge surrounded by dense pine forest, an ocean of dark greens stretching in every direction. At night, the fog came. It rolled in like slow waves, thick and unnatural. Even when the stars shone bright above, the ground below would vanish into a pale, churning sea. Eli chalked it up to temperature inversion. He wasn't afraid. Not yet. On the 5th night, he woke at 2:17 a.m. Something had changed. The fog was thicker than before, so dense he couldn't see the railing 3 feet outside his window. And then came the sound. A soft tap. Tap. Tap at the door at the base of the tower. 3 slow knocks. Deliberate. Eli froze in bed. The warning flashed through his mind. Do not answer it. If it knocks, his rational mind argued, it must be an animal, a branch swaying in the wind. But the knocks had a rhythm. They came again. Top, top, top. His pulse hammered. He reached for the old two-way radio. Gray needle to Station Bravo. I think I've got someone outside the tower. Over. Static. Then a faint reply. No personnel scheduled. Negative on any visits. Remain inside. Over. Remain inside. Easy for them to say. The knocks continued, sometimes pausing for long stretches, only to resume when Eli tried to sleep. He saw no silhouette at the door. No shadow. Only the swirling fog. The 6th day brought no sun. The forest remained cloaked in a pale shroud. And something had changed inside the fog. It wasn't still anymore. Eli caught fleeting glimpses of movement, shapes that seemed to swim through the mist, just out of sight, branches that shifted when no wind blew, and always the slow, deliberate knocking. By now, the logbook entries had changed from dry weather notes to frantic scrawls. Persistent knocking, no visual confirmation, no prints, no wildlife scene, sleep impossible, fog dense beyond normal pattern, light not penetrating, movement since below. Something is out there. It knows I am here. On the 7th night, the pattern shifted. The knocks came not only from the door, but from the metal stairs winding up the tower's base. Clang, 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 as if something shapeless was moving up toward him. And then came the voice, or rather, a mimic of a voice, a sound like words formed by something that had only heard them secondhand. Let me in. Distorted. Wrong. Neither male nor female. Not human. Eli jammed the radio button. Station Bravo. Emergency. Something is trying to get inside. Please advise. But the only reply was static, and beneath it, a faint, familiar sound. Top, top, top. Now inside the tower itself. At dawn, the fog thinned. The presence withdrew. Eli found no sign of forced entry. No footprints, no marks. Only a single new line of writing on the inside of the window. You opened it once. But Eli swore he hadn't. Had he? The final log entry from Eli Harper was written the following night. I see it now. Not a shape, but an absence. A hollow in the fog that drinks the light. When I look directly, it slips away. But when I turn, it is there. I will not answer it. I will not look again. After that, no more entries. Rescue teams reached Gray Needle 3 days later. They found the tower intact. Supplies untouched. Radio fully functional. But no sign of Eli Harper. The logbook remained open on the desk. And on the last page, one final line had been added in a different, unsteady hand. You looked. To this day, no one knows what truly happened to Eli. Gray Needle stands empty now, sealed by the Forest Service. But sometimes on clear autumn nights, hikers report seeing a narrow column of fog twisting up from the ridge and hearing soft, deliberate knocks echoing through the trees. It was supposed to be an ordinary night at Black Pine Watchtower. An isolated steel structure rising 60 feet above the dense, fog-choked forest of northern Montana. Park Ranger Jonah Pierce had been assigned to the tower for the season, his 4th year now. He knew the rhythms of this place. The hours of silence, broken only by wind hissing through pine needles, the occasional crackle of static on the old shortwave radio, or the hollow clang of metal shifting as the tower swayed. But on this night, something changed. At first, it was a subtle thing. Around 1:17 a.m., the air inside the tower seemed to thicken. A strange pressure built up, like the atmosphere was growing heavy, pressing inward. Jonah chalked it up to exhaustion. He'd been awake since dawn after all, and long shifts had a way of playing tricks on the mind. Then the signal began. A sharp burst of static erupted from the radio, harsh enough to make Jonah flinch. He turned toward the equipment, expecting a garbled weather update or perhaps another ranger checking in. But the voice that followed wasn't coming from any known channel. A woman's voice, strained, distant, pierced through the static. Her words were fragmented, but one phrase repeated with chilling clarity. "Help! Help me! They're coming, can't get out." The broadcast cut to silence. Jonah stared at the radio. Protocol dictated that if an emergency signal was received, it must be logged and reported immediately. He grabbed the frequency log and noted the time. But when he scanned the official channels, there was nothing. No distress call, no missing persons report, no transmission registered at all. That's when the screaming began. From somewhere deep in the forest below, a high, ragged scream rose through the night air. It wasn't the sharp cry of an animal. Jonah had heard plenty of those. This was human, panicked, sustained, and worst of all, it seemed to be moving. The scream would echo near the western tree line, then moments later from the east, and then again beneath the tower itself. Impossible distances covered in seconds. Jonah scanned the black forest through his binoculars, but saw nothing. No flashlights, no movement, no silhouette between the trees. Trying to steady his nerves, he switched on the tower's loudspeaker, a standard feature meant for issuing warnings to hikers. "This is Ranger Pierce at Black Pine Watchtower," he announced into the mic. "If you're in distress, signal back. Stay in place. Help is on the way." No reply came, only that dreadful, wavering scream, growing closer. Jonah contacted the ranger station at the base of the ridge. His voice shook as he relayed what was happening. The dispatcher on duty, an older ranger named Grayson, sounded confused. "Jonah, there's no emergency broadcast on our end," Grayson said. "No missing persons reported tonight. Are you sure you're not picking up old chatter? Weather can bounce signals sometimes." Jonah knew what he'd heard. He knew it wasn't just weather interference. But trying to convince Grayson was getting him nowhere. He was alone. At 2:03 a.m., a new sound filtered through the static. Not a scream this time. Something worse. A low, distorted voice. Male, intoning words in a language Jonah couldn't place. It wasn't a recording glitch. The cadence was deliberate, rhythmic, almost ritualistic. Between the chanting, a faint metallic clanging could be heard, like chains being dragged across concrete. Then the woman's voice returned, so faint now that Jonah had to press his ear against the radio speaker. "They are here. No light. No way out. Don't look at them." As if in response, the lights in the tower flickered violently. Jonah's emergency lantern sputtered out. The air grew icy cold. Something was outside. Through the frosted glass, Jonah glimpsed movement below. Several dark figures circled the tower base, impossibly tall, with elongated limbs. They glided between the trees without sound, their shapes barely distinct from the surrounding shadows. One by one, they tilted their heads upward, though no faces were visible. Just the impression of gaping, hollow voids where eyes should have been. Jonah backed away from the window. He grabbed his flashlight, flicked it on, and shone it downward. The beam caught nothing. The clearing below was empty once more. Then the screaming resumed. Now, so loud it seemed to shake the tower itself. But it wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was inside the radio. The speaker shrieked with impossible volume. Jonah tore the power cable from the unit, but the sound continued, pouring from every corner of the room, vibrating through the metal floor. Suddenly, silence. The tower shuddered once, then all was still. Dawn approached. When the relief ranger arrived at 7:30 a.m., Jonah was found sitting against the far wall, flashlight clutched in white-knuckled hands, eyes bloodshot, lips moving soundlessly. The radio was inoperable. The emergency log was missing. No audio evidence remained. When questioned later, Jonah could only repeat fragments. The signal, the scream, they were here, don't look at them. No trace of any unknown broadcast was ever found in the ranger station's recordings. The Black Pine Watchtower radio had no history of signal anomalies, and no hikers were reported missing in the area that night. Yet, in the weeks that followed, other rangers posted to Black Pine began to report strange disturbances, phantom voices on the radio, flickering lights, the sound of chains beneath the tower at night. No one stayed for more than a single shift after that. By the end of the season, the Watchtower was decommissioned. Some say it was due to structural concerns. Others aren't so sure. They believe that on certain nights, if you scan the forest frequencies between 1 o'clock and 3 a.m., you might still catch the faintest echo, a distant woman's voice whispering, "Help me, they're coming." They tell you that a watchtower is the safest place to be in the forest. High above the trees, surrounded by steel and glass, nothing can touch you. You can see for miles, but sometimes it can see you too. This was told by a man named Caleb, a fire spotter stationed in a remote watchtower in the Pacific Northwest. He'd worked the job for 4 seasons. Long shifts, total isolation. Only a two-way radio and an old field log to keep him company. It was a late September evening when the first sign appeared. The sun was bleeding out behind the tree line, and shadows swallowed the forest. Caleb sat at his observation desk, binoculars in hand, scanning the darkening horizon. That's when he noticed something odd in the treetops, an unusual glint about 600 yards north, near an old growth cluster. Something metallic? No, it moved. A quick flash, like a reflection from eyes. Too high up to belong to any animal he knew. At first, he thought it was an owl. But owls don't reflect light that way, and they certainly don't stay perfectly still for hours. He logged the sighting, shrugged it off. Probably fatigue. His shift had been long. But when he turned in for the night, that's when the knocking began. It was soft at first. A hollow tap, tap, tap against the lower frame of the tower's metal supports. Almost like a branch brushing in the wind. Except there was no wind. Then it grew louder, more deliberate. He shone his floodlight downward. Nothing but the skeletal outlines of pine trunks below. No animals, no wind, silence. When morning came, Caleb inspected the base of the tower. No tracks, no branches against the supports. He radioed in the strange incident, but HQ brushed it off. Maybe a raccoon, they said. That afternoon, he scanned the same treetops again. The glint was gone. He exhaled with relief. But later that evening, it was back, closer this time. Lower, maybe 300 yards out. Too bright, pinpoint reflections in the dense canopy. Unnervingly human in height and spacing. Not an owl, not any known forest creature. Caleb watched for hours. The eyes didn't blink. They didn't shift or sway with the branches. They simply hovered, impossibly fixed. By midnight, the knocking returned. Louder, more insistent, like knuckles rapping against cold steel. This time it wasn't below. It was coming from the tower itself. The sound echoed up through the staircase. Caleb froze. He grabbed his flashlight and edged toward the hatch that led to the platform. He called out. No answer. The knocking stopped. When he dared open the hatch and look, nothing. No one there. But when he shut the hatch, he noticed something disturbing. Thin, wet streaks of black residue smeared along the outer handrail. Not sap, not oil, something else. Sleep was impossible. He paced the watchroom floor, jumping at every groan of the metal frame. At dawn, the eyes were gone once more. He filed another report. HQ dismissed it again. Hallucination from stress, they said. But by the third night, things escalated. As darkness fell, Caleb made a decision. He would record whatever was happening. He set up his old camcorder on the observation deck, pointed toward the tree line where the glint appeared. At 2:17 a.m., the camera caught it. Two glowing points, hovering unnaturally among the trees, moving impossibly slow, not bobbing like an animal, drifting as if gliding through the air. The footage was grainy, but unmistakable. No known forest creature moved that way. No eyes glowed with such intensity. But what the camera didn't catch was worse. While he was reviewing the tape inside, the knocking began again. This time, from the observation room door. Something was on the platform with him. Heart racing, Caleb gripped the door handle, locking it. The knocking turned to scraping. A low, drawn-out scrape across the door's exterior like claws or nails. Then silence. When he finally looked through the peephole, the platform was empty, except for one thing. On the glass window opposite the door, two smudges. Oval, horizontal smears, like the mark left by eyes pressed against the glass. They were too wide apart for a human face. Too high. And worst of all, they were on the outside of the tower window, 80 feet above ground. By morning, the eyes and the canopy were gone, but the smudges remained. Caleb didn't wait. He radioed HQ, demanded an immediate evac. They agreed, reluctantly. When the crew arrived, they found Caleb pale, sleep-deprived, clutching the camcorder. He showed them the footage. Two technicians went up to the tower. They scrubbed the window. The smudges wouldn't come off. Not with cleaner, not with alcohol. They were embedded, as though burned into the glass itself. Officially, the report lists it as unexplained residue. The footage was archived, never released. Caleb quit shortly after, refusing to speak about it again. The tower remains decommissioned to this day. Locals say strange lights still appear in those same treetops. Some believe it was a forest spirit. Others say an interdimensional being. But those who've worked that district tell a simpler story. Don't stare too long at the eyes above the canopy. If you do, they might start staring back. They say every forest has a place where things go wrong. For Black Hollow National Park, that place was Tower 6, a rusting, skeletal fire watchtower forgotten by both maps and management. It wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Decades ago, a series of landslides had cut off its access road. The newer towers had long replaced it. Yet somehow, it still stood, alone on a cliffside overlooking a gnarled expanse of pine and fog. And for reasons no one could explain, radios from neighboring towers sometimes picked up stray signals from Tower 6. Static-filled transmissions. Barely audible. Always the same words. I see them. They're close now. No one admitted to manning it. No one was assigned there. Yet someone or something was speaking from that tower. Ranger Elias had heard the stories. He thought they were old park folklore, just enough creep factor to scare new recruits. But when his supervisor asked for a volunteer to investigate the signal one cold October morning, Elias found his own hand rising before he could think twice. I'll do it, he said. He regretted it almost instantly. It was a grueling 3-hour hike to reach the overgrown trail leading toward Tower 6. By noon, the fog had thickened around him. Twisted shapes loomed from the mist. Sometimes trees, sometimes things he wasn't sure were trees. The forest felt wrong the deeper he went. Sound was muffled. No birdson, no insectum. Even the crunch of his own boots seemed distant, as if the ground beneath him had become a hollow shell. But he kept going. When Tower 6 finally emerged from the fog, Elias stopped short. The structure looked ancient, its metal frame laced with rust, its upper cabin leaning at a slight, unsettling angle. The surrounding forest seemed to recoil from it. No growth pressed close. The trees bent away, leaving a barren circle of dirt and bone-dry needles. It was colder here. Bitter, unnatural cold. Then Elias noticed the door. A single wooden door marked the base of the tower, and stamped upon its faded surface was a massive, blackened handprint. It looked rotten, the imprint smeared and pitted as though something diseased had pressed there. The stench was worse. A sour, fetid odor of decay and old water. Yet no corpse was in sight. No animal nearby. Just that dreadful mark, as if the wood itself had been infected. Elias reached out to touch it and froze. A soft thud echoed from inside the tower. Then another. Thud, thud, as though something was moving within. He gripped his flashlight and radio. Tower 6. I've reached the location. There's an anomaly here. I'm going in. Static answered him. And beneath that, faintly, as though whispered from beneath the static, a voice. I see them. They're close now. Elias swallowed hard. The door creaked open with the faintest push. Inside, the metal staircase spiraled upward into gloom. The walls were slick with condensation, and a mildew-like film coated the steps. As Elias climbed, each footfall echoed unnaturally, the sound stretching longer than it should. He passed torn remnants of old ranger jackets, their insignia faded beyond recognition. A crushed headset, scraps of damn paper, and always that stench. Halfway up, he noticed handprints. More of them. Wrought black, half-melted impressions smeared along the railing, the walls, the steps. Each one larger than a normal human hand, the fingers elongated, uneven. They seemed to pulse faintly under his flashlight, as if the rot beneath had a life of its own. By the time he reached the observation cabin, his breath fogged in the freezing air. The door stood ajar. Beyond it, a single chair faced the glass. And in that chair sat something. It wore a ranger uniform, or what remained of one. The fabric had fused with its skin in places, flesh mottled with black growth. Its face was obscured, a mass of lesions and darkness where features should have been. But its eyes were open, glassy, staring, watching something beyond the glass. And as Elias entered, the radio on the desk crackled. I see them. They're close now. But the thing in the chair hadn't moved. Its lips were frozen shut. The voice wasn't coming from it. It was coming from somewhere deeper, beneath the floorboards behind the walls. Elias backed toward the stairwell. But as he turned, he heard it. Vet footsteps, ascending the stairs below. Not fast, steady, measured. Thud, thud, thud. And worse, the smell was rising with it. A choking wave of rot that sent bile crawling up his throat. The handprints began to appear, fresh again, wet, dripping black, ooze along the walls as if newly made. He spun toward the window. Far below, he saw them. Figures emerging from the forest. Pale, long-limbed, heads tilted unnaturally. Moving in perfect unison toward the tower. Dozens of them, drawn by something. By him. His radio burst to life again. They're inside. You have to run. A different voice now. Higher, urgent. Not the same mechanical whisper from before. You have to run now. He didn't question it. Elias lunged down the stairs. Flashlight swinging wildly, breath tearing through his lungs. Behind him, wet footfalls quickened. A guttural sound, half breath, half growl, rose in pursuit. He didn't dare look back. The last thing he glimpsed before bursting through the base door was a hand, massive and dripping, reaching around the stairwell. Not quite human, not quite alive. The forest had changed. The fog had deepened into near night. The ground beneath his boots seemed to pulse with every stride. And the tower behind him, it was humming, a low, awful vibration that resonated through the trees. As he stumbled toward the trail, Elias glanced back once, just once. Through the fog, he saw the upper windows of Tower 6 glowing faintly. And pressed against the cabin glass, dozens of blackened handprints, as though something inside had gathered to watch him flee. The last radio transmission he caught before the signal died was this. No one leaves the tower marked. Elias made it back to camp, bruised, frostbitten, shaking. They found no handprint on him. Not at first, but days later, while scrubbing mud from his pack, his hand brushed the side of it and came away stained black. A perfect, rotten handprint had been pressed into the fabric, and no matter how hard he scrubbed, it would not come clean. No ranger speaks of Tower 6 now. The path is sealed. But sometimes, late at night, stray transmissions still flicker across the radios of nearby stations. I see them. They're close now. And always, after such nights, one finds the faint imprint of a blackened hand, somewhere they least expect it, waiting. There are places the wind remembers, places it circles again and again, whispering to itself the secrets it cannot forget. The old fire lookout on Hemlock Ridge was one such place. Built in the 1930s, its iron frame had long since rusted to a dark, brittle skeleton. The wooden steps creaked like ancient bones. Only the bravest rangers volunteered to take night shifts there anymore. They said it was too isolated, too exposed, but mostly too haunted. Jason Price wasn't superstitious. At 28, he was the youngest ranger in the district and eager to prove himself. When a schedule came up short for an overnight watch at Hemlock Ridge, he signed up without hesitation. "Bad luck spot," his supervisor muttered. "Keep your radio on." Jason smiled and waved it off. As the sun sank that evening, painting the trees in bruised gold and crimson, he hiked up the winding path alone. His boots crunched over frost-stiff grass. When he reached the tower, he paused. It loomed above him, stark against the bruised sky. The top cabin's windows were dark, reflecting only clouds. Jason swallowed and began to climb. Each step groaned beneath his weight. The air grew colder the higher he rose, until his breath came out in silver bursts. Inside the cabin, he unpacked his gear: a thermos of coffee, flashlight, notebook, and radio. He logged his check-in: 2000 hours. Hemlock Ridge Tower. All clear. The first 2 hours passed uneventfully. Jason paced the cabin, scanning the darkening forest through the binoculars. Occasionally, wind rattled the windows. The radio crackled with static. At 10:43 p.m., something shifted. It began with a sound, a faint, rhythmic thump, soft at first, as though coming from a great distance. Jason turned down his radio. The sound persisted, slow, deliberate. Thump, thump, thump. Boots on iron stairs. Someone was climbing the tower. Jason grabbed his flashlight and moved to the door. "Hello," he called out, voice steady. "This is a restricted site. Identify yourself." No answer, just the steady, measured footfalls. Thump, thump, thump. Now louder, now closer. Jason's heart began to hammer. No one else was scheduled here tonight. No patrols, no visitors. He was certain of it. He shone the light through the cabin window, sweeping the stairs below. Nothing. Yet the steps continued. Thump, thump, thump. Closer still, only a flight or two beneath him. Jason flipped on the cabin's floodlights. The steel staircase lit up in stark white glare. It was empty. Every step down to the forest floor stood bare, illuminated. But he still heard them. Thump, thump. Now, just below the cabin, Jason backed away from the door. His mouth went dry. He keyed his radio. Hemlock Ridge Tower to base. Possible intruder. Unknown subject approaching. Requesting confirmation of any scheduled patrol. Only static answered. Then, another sound. A second set of boots. Lighter. Faster. Out of sync with the first. Top, top, top. Jason stared at the trapdoor that led to the stairs. The heavy latch rattled, as though tugged by unseen hands. Thump, top, thump, top. 2 sets of footsteps. One slow and deliberate. The other frantic and skittering. Jason backed into the far corner of the cabin, flashlight trembling in his grip. Again, he radioed. "Hemlock Ridge Tower to base. Please respond." This time, a voice hissed through the static. Low, garbled. "Not alone." Jason froze. "Say again, base." "You're breaking up." Only static. Thump, top, thump, top. Suddenly, the sound ceased. Silence pressed against the windows. Jason strained to listen, breath held. Then, a soft knock on the cabin door. 3 slow taps. Knock, knock, knock. Jason's grip tightened around the flashlight. "Who's there?" he demanded. Silence. He approached the door, every nerve screaming. With his free hand, he flipped the deadbolt. Slowly, he opened the door. No one stood there. The stairs gleamed empty under the harsh light. The forest below remained still. But on the threshold, something caught his eye. A single, muddy boot print. Large, fresh, and beside it, a smaller one. Border, childlike. Jason slammed the door shut and bolted it. His pulse thundered in his ears. He retreated to the radio, voice shaking. Hemlock Ridge Tower, urgent. Unknown entities on site. One large, one small, a possible hallucination, requesting extraction. Static, then the voice again. Don't open the door. Jason spun, flashlight beam darting across the empty cabin. The trapdoor latch rattled again. Harder this time. Clank, clank, clank. Then both sets of footsteps resumed, circling the tower. Thump, tulp, thump, tulp. Around and around they went. Jason dropped to the floor, back against the wall. The boots circled faster, matching the pounding of his heart. Thump, tulp, thump, tulp. Endless, maddening. At some point, Jason must have blacked out. When dawn light streamed through the cabin windows, he awoke cold and shaking on the floor. Outside, the forest looked normal. Birds chirped. Frost glistened on leaves. The stairs were empty. The boot prints had vanished. Jason called in an urgent request for extraction. When the relief team arrived 2 hours later, they found him pale and trembling. He refused to return to the tower. Later, a grizzled old ranger approached him at the station. "You heard them, didn't you?" the man asked. His voice was low. Jason could only nod. 2 sets of boots. Always 2. The old man's eyes darkened. Happens every decade or so. Folks say it's the spirit of the first ranger who died up there, and the little girl he couldn't save from the fire. Jason shuddered. "But why do they walk the stairs?" he whispered. The old man only shrugged. "Maybe they're trapped, trying to reach the top. Maybe they're waiting for someone to join them." To this day, Hemlock Ridge Tower remains officially active, but no ranger has volunteered for a night shift there in over 5 years. And when the wind rises just right, some say you can still hear it. Thump, tulp, thump, tulp. 2 sets of boots on hollow iron stairs. Forever climbing. It started with a storm. A once-in-a-decade cyclone had swept through the coastal town of Ashwell, leaving behind a landscape stripped bare. Trees that had stood for centuries were now nothing but twisted trunks, their roots clawing helplessly at the sky. Roads were choked with debris. Power lines dangled like spiderwebs. For 3 days, no one ventured out. The town cocooned in its own darkness and dread. When the clouds finally broke and the sun returned, Ashwell's residents emerged to survey the damage. That's when they noticed it. Rising above the forested hills just beyond the town's northern edge, where no structure had ever stood before, was a watchtower. It was impossible to miss. A stark silhouette against the pale sky, constructed of what looked like aged iron and blackened wood, crowned by a circular observation room ringed with glass windows. No one remembered it being there. It was not marked on any maps. No construction crews had ever been seen traveling up the narrow paths beyond the ridge. Yet there it stood. Naturally, rumors bloomed like mold. Some said it had always been there, hidden by the dense canopy until the storm revealed it. Others whispered about old military installations from forgotten wars. But the majority believed what they saw with their own eyes, that this tower had appeared, whole and complete, sometime during the night the cyclone raged. A small group of locals decided to investigate. Among them was Claire Hensley, a 28-year-old amateur photographer known for her explorations of abandoned places. She'd spent years documenting the decay of old homes and shuttered factories in the region. The mystery of the tower proved irresistible. Claire set out one morning with her camera, a flashlight, and a recorder, accompanied by her older brother Dan and their friend Marcus. They followed the dirt path leading north, winding through fallen branches and sodden leaves, until the forest thinned and the tower rose before them. It was even stranger up close. The metal framework was covered in flaking rust, yet the structure seemed stable. The wood of the outer walls was dry and splintered, as though aged by decades of weather. Yet it had supposedly only appeared days ago. More unsettling were the signs of occupation. A lantern hanging on a hook by the door, its glass unbroken. Fresh footprints in the mud leading up to the entrance, too recent to have been made before the storm. Dan gripped Claire's arm. "Are we sure we want to do this?" Claire hesitated only a moment, then nodded. The door wasn't locked. It creaked open under her touch, revealing a spiral staircase ascending into darkness. They began to climb. The air inside was heavy with a faint metallic tang. Each footstep echoed strangely, as if the space were larger than it appeared. The higher they climbed, the colder it became, until their breath misted before them. Near the top, Claire paused. Her recorder, clipped to her jacket, emitted a burst of static. She frowned and tapped it. The static ceased, then was replaced by a soft whisper. "Keep climbing." Claire's blood ran cold. She glanced at Dan and Marcus, who seemed not to have heard it. They reached the observation room. It was a circular space lined with tall, grimy windows. A heavy wooden chair sat in the center, facing north toward the distant sea. On the floor lay an old journal, its leather cover worn to softness. Claire picked it up. Inside, the entries were written in a neat, looping hand. Day 1. The tower calls. I cannot resist. Day 3. Something watches me from the forest. Day 5. The sea speaks when the wind blows. Day 7. I no longer remember the world below. Claire's fingers trembled as she turned the pages. The later entries devolved into frantic scrawls, indecipherable save for one recurring phrase. The storm brings the tower. The tower brings the storm. A deep boom reverberated through the room. Marcus ran to a window and gasped. Black clouds were gathering on the horizon, swirling unnaturally fast. A second storm was forming directly above them. Duncourt said, "We need to get out. Now." As they turned to descend, the door to the staircase slammed shut. Marcus lunged at it, pulling futilely. Claire's recorder emitted another burst of static. This time, the whisper was louder. "Stace." The temperature dropped further. Frost formed on the glass. Outside, the storm clouds churned with flashes of sickly green lightning. Claire raised her camera and took a photo, only to find the screen cracked and dead. Then came the knocking. A slow, deliberate series of knocks from the outside wall of the observation room. Impossible, as they were at least 60 feet above the ground. The sound circled the room, moving from window to window. Dan grabbed a rusted iron bar and held it like a weapon. Claire's mind raced. The journal's words echoed within her. The tower brings the storm. A terrible thought struck her. What if this tower only exists because of the storm? She whispered. And what if it needs us here to exist? Marcus stared. You think it's alive? Claire shuddered. I think it's a trap. The knocking ceased. In the silence that followed, Claire noticed something else. A faint heartbeat-like pulse beneath the floorboards. The entire structure seemed to hum in rhythm. Suddenly, the door burst open, but the staircase beyond was no longer the one they had climbed. The walls were slick with moisture, and the steps spiraled downward into an unnatural darkness. They faced a choice: remain trapped in the observation room, or descend into the unknown. Summoning her courage, Claire led the way down. The staircase seemed endless. Time lost meaning. Dan's watch had stopped. Their phones were useless. The only sound was their own ragged breathing, and that constant whisper from the recorder. Closer, closer. At last, they emerged. Not into the forest, but into the center of a vast, gray plain beneath a roiling sky. The tower loomed behind them, taller and darker than before. Ahead, a figure waited. It was a man, gaunt, clad in a tattered uniform that seemed from another era. His eyes were black pits. He raised a hand and pointed back toward the tower. You must watch, he said, voice hollow. The storm comes. The cycle must continue. Claire's mind reeled. The pieces clicked into place. The tower wasn't merely a structure. It was a mechanism, a beacon summoned by the storm, luring the curious to become its next watchers. The man before them had once stood where they now did, trapped in an endless loop. No, Claire whispered. We're not staying. Gripping her brother and Marcus, she turned and ran. The plane seemed to stretch on forever, but they forced their legs to move. Behind them, the man's voice echoed. You cannot flee the storm. You are the storm. But they kept running, until the world blurred and the light dimmed. Claire awoke in her own bed. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Bel sang. For a moment, she thought it had all been a nightmare, until she noticed the journal on her nightstand. Its pages were blank, save for one fresh line, written in her own handwriting. The tower waits. The storm is not yet done. In the distance, thunder rumbled.